It doesn't start with a choice. It starts with a moment, small and sharp, when you realize no one else is going to step up, that if you don't take care of this, no one will. And you're just a child, but suddenly you're the only adult in the room. This is where childhood ends, not with age, but with responsibility that was never yours to carry. Maybe you were the child who learned to make breakfast for your siblings when you were barely tall enough to reach the stove, the one who checked if the bills were paid, who mediated fights between adults, who became fluent in crisis management before you learned algebra. You didn't choose this role, it chose you, because someone was absent, physically, emotionally, or both, and nature abhors a vacuum, so you filled it. By the time you were a teenager, you'd already lived several lifetimes. You were the translator, the peacekeeper, the emotional regulator. You filed paperwork, managed schedules, remembered appointments that weren't yours to remember. You parented your parents, raised your siblings, held the center while everything around you threatened to collapse. Now, as an adult, the pattern continues. You're the responsible one in every group, the person people turn to in a crisis, the one who plans, who organizes, who anticipates problems before they happen. You're competent, reliable, absurdly capable. But here's what no one sees. You never got to be young. You never got to be reckless, irresponsible, delightfully foolish. You skipped the part of life where you're allowed to make mistakes because someone else is there to catch you. Because in your family there was no net, there was only you. Psychologists call this parentification, when a child is forced into a caregiver role, taking on responsibilities that should belong to adults. But that clinical term doesn't capture the full weight of what happens to your development, your identity, your sense of self. Here's what really occurs. Childhood is supposed to be a time of dependency, where you learn that the world is safe enough to explore, that adults will handle the big stuff, that you can afford to be small. But when you're parentified, that developmental stage gets hijacked. Instead of learning, I am cared for, you learn, I am the caregiver. Instead of, I can be vulnerable, you learn, vulnerability is dangerous. This creates what researchers call a role reversal trauma. Your brain develops in a state of hyper-responsibility. Your stress response system matures too quickly, always scanning for the next crisis, the next need, the next problem to solve. And here's the neurological cost. Children who become parents often develop what looks like precocious maturity. They're wise beyond their years, incredibly capable, almost adult-like. And society rewards this. Teachers praise you. Family members rely on you. You're so mature for your age, they say, not realizing that statement is a tragedy, not a compliment. Because that maturity wasn't chosen. It was survival. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, decision-making, emotional regulation, had to come online years before it was ready. You became hyper-competent, but at a cost. You never developed the neural pathways for receiving care, for trusting someone else to handle things, for believing you could rest. And there's another layer, emotional parentification. Maybe you weren't cooking meals or paying bills, but you were managing your parents' emotions. You became their therapist, their confidant, their emotional support. You soothed their anxiety, absorbed their anger, carried their grief. You learned to read their moods like a weather system, adjusting yourself constantly to keep the peace. This teaches your nervous system a devastating lesson. My needs are less important than managing theirs. So you grow up believing that love means self-sacrifice, that being needed is the closest thing to being loved, that if you stop being useful, you'll stop being wanted. But here's what no one tells you about being the parentified child. You become an adult who doesn't know how to be cared for, because when someone offers help, it feels wrong, foreign, like a trap. You've spent your entire life being the dependable one, and suddenly, someone wants to take care of you? Your nervous system doesn't know what to do with that, so you deflect. I'm fine. I've got it. Don't worry about me. You smile and change the subject and keep everyone at arm's length, not because you don't want connection, but because you genuinely don't know how to receive it. And relationships become complicated. You attract people who need you, because that's the dynamic that feels familiar. You become the partner who parents their partner, the friend who always gives advice but never asks for it, the person everyone leans on but who leans on no one. And slowly, a resentment builds. Not toward any specific person, but toward the role itself. You're exhausted from being everyone's anchor. You're tired of being strong. You want to collapse, to be messy, to let someone else make the decisions for once. But you can't, because the moment you stop holding everything together, you feel guilty, selfish, like you're failing some invisible contract you signed when you were 7 years old. And here's the cruelest part. You don't even know who you are outside of this role. When you were supposed to be discovering your identity, your interests, your desires, your personality, you were too busy managing everyone else's lives. So now, when someone asks, "What do you want?" you freeze, because you've spent so long figuring out what everyone else needs that your own wants feel distant, unfamiliar, almost irrelevant. You became so good at being the parent that you forgot how to be yourself. Here's the truth they don't tell parentified children. You don't have to keep proving you're worthy of staying. The role you were given, caregiver, protector, adult before your time, was never a reflection of your value. It was a reflection of what was missing. You didn't earn your place by being useful. You always deserved to be cared for just for existing. So what does healing look like when you've spent your entire life being the parent? It starts with something terrifying. Learning to be the child you never got to be. This doesn't mean becoming irresponsible or reckless. It means giving yourself permission to not always be in control, to make mistakes without catastrophizing, to ask for help without feeling like a burden, to trust that the world won't collapse if you stop holding it together. Here's a practice, releasing the hypervigilance. Notice when you're scanning for problems that aren't yours to solve, when you're managing someone's emotions without being asked, when you're taking responsibility for outcomes you can't control, and gently ask yourself, whose job is this really? If the answer isn't clearly mine, practice the radical act of stepping back. You can care about someone without managing their life. You can love someone without fixing their problems. You can be present without being in charge. And here's the hardest part, learning to receive care without suspicion. When someone offers to help, instead of deflecting, try saying, "Thank you, I'd appreciate that," even if it feels uncomfortable, even if your brain screams that you should be handling it yourself. Because you're retraining your nervous system to understand that needing people doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. You might also need to grieve, to mourn the childhood you didn't get, the lightness you never felt, the years spent in survival mode when you should have been playing, exploring, being delightfully irresponsible. That grief is valid, and it doesn't mean your life was wasted. It means you survived something that required enormous strength. But survival and healing are different, and you deserve both. You spent so many years believing that your worth was tied to how much you could carry, that love was something you earned through service, through sacrifice, through never being a burden. But here's the quiet truth. You were never supposed to be the parent. You were supposed to be the child. Messy, needy, allowed to grow at your own pace. And even though that was taken from you, you can still give it to yourself now. You don't have to be strong all the time. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to hold everyone's world together while your own falls apart. You are allowed to rest, to play, to be imperfect, to let someone else take care of things for once. You are allowed to just be, without a role, without a function, without proving your right to exist. The child in you who never got to be cared for, they're still there, still waiting, still hoping someone will finally say, "You don't have to do this alone anymore." So say it to yourself, you don't have to do this alone anymore. You were never meant to carry the weight of the world at 7 years old. You were meant to be held, protected, allowed to grow slowly into yourself. And it's not too late to give yourself that. Start there. That's where you finally get to be free.